10 to 15 years linked with the NDP to make sure that the system at local government is receptive enough for the infrastructure to take course. Otherwise, national and provincial will plan, and municipalities will not be ready to house these projects, and business will be frustrated. So I think we're at the key of making sure that whatever we've been speaking about in the morning is also realized.
And at this point, my sincere apologies, and I would be remiss not to acknowledge the presence of a very esteemed international guest at the symposium as well, Mr. Adesina, who's the president of the African Development Bank, and Mr. Diop, who's the vice president of the infrastructure, vice president for infrastructure, I should say, at the World Bank. You are most welcome as well. And starting with your opening remarks to what you've heard from President Cyril Ramaphosa this morning. And, you know, the President spoke about some very important aspects apart from the COVID-19 pandemic background to which this is taking place. He also spoke about the disruption that this pandemic has brought about. And perhaps sometimes we tend to dwell a lot on the challenges that the disruption brings, but the disruption also brings with it opportunities. And what are those opportunities, this period of transformation that the President speaks about? How do we take up these opportunities and bring about the type of transformation that we want to see? Not forgetting that this cannot be a successful project if it is a project of government. It has to take along every other sector of society, including civil society, including big business, small business. Everybody who has a role to play has to buy into this program. If not, it has no prospects of succeeding. And I think it's very important that we remember this, because we speak of where we come from, what we've seen, all the gains we've made, but we also cannot look past some of the shortcomings and some of the failures that have happened along the way, but looking at the opportunities that COVID-19 disruption brings about, we have to look at growth and the recalibration of the economy. How is that going to happen? Where's the money going to come from? Where are we going to start in terms of kickstarting these economies so that they can actually take care of these infrastructure development programs that we talk about? Mr. Adesina, I'm going to give it over to you now to be the first one to take a bite at giving your opening remarks to President Cyril Ramaphosa. We can hear you clearly, Mr. Adesina. Please go ahead.
All right. Good morning, Your Excellency, Mr. President, President Ramaphosa, Deputy President, Honorable Premiers, Mayor, Honorable Minister, and thanks for the wonderful presentation. Also to Dr. Kopa. In fact, what the name was mentioned, I thought that the name of President Ramaphosa announced that everybody else hasn't been spoken to else. Mr. President, thank you so much, Your Excellency, for inviting me and, of course, to participate here in this fantastic symposium. I want to first and foremost commend your leadership and your effort in helping South Africa, of course, the whole continent, as we deal with the coronavirus situation. And I also want to commend you, Mr. President, for your vision, clarity of thought that you have put together in terms of the importance of infrastructure for sustainable growth in South Africa. Just listening to you, it's very clear to me from the statement you made about the flywheel in which you want to generate a sustainable, faster growth and development in South Africa is through infrastructure. And I want to also commend you for the National Development Plan, which was mentioned for 2030. Your Excellency, Mr. President, I am saying that we at the bank are very excited about South Africa. I know you mentioned in your remarks about the issue of the downgrade of South Africa. We don't see a downgrade of South Africa. Very bullish about South Africa. The fundamentals are right in South Africa. You know, the COVID-19 situation is like somebody that is going on a highway, and then somehow you have a detour of that highway. And then we have to come back to regular business of continue to grow. And that's what you've laid out, Mr. President, very clearly, that we need to continue to invest in critical areas that will allow us to structurally transform the economy. And energy is a big one. For us as a bank in South Africa, our total investment now is about $4.7 billion. And I'm glad that you're talking about the importance of multilateral development banks. The energy sector for us is fundamental to energy. There's really nothing that one can do. And we have been investing, and we will continue to invest in the energy sector. We've invested close to $3 billion in the energy sector, largely for Eskom. And I would like to say that as we look at infrastructure, we've got to make sure that this issue of energy deficit, we do it, but in a way that is environmentally sustainable, and that we continue to work on renewable energy. Mr. President, I want to commend the government for what you have done with regard to the issue of renewable energy. South Africa today, as far as what we hear, has on this continent the best program for actually doing renewable energy. And I think that we need to continue to do that for wind, for solar in particular. We as a bank, we're investing in quite a number of these areas, which is the Sere Wind Project, 100 megawatts, the Zina Solar Project, the Redstone Project. These are all important projects that we will continue to invest in. And thinking of money, we cannot leave money on the table. It's something like this. The president said he wants the money. Yes. We have a project that we have helped to develop with several others under a syndication, which is the Redstone Project. It's $518 million. It would be great, Mr. President, if you could have Eskom to actually sign the offtake agreement for this, because we put together a world-class group. It's $518 million. It's done. It's just for that to be done. I thought I would bring that to your attention, Mr. President. I also want to say that as we think of these efforts, we must look at syndications. Syndications are going to play a very big role, bringing so many people together. We've done $1.3 billion of syndications, AV syndications for South Africa, to get capital for Eskom to invest in power transmission lines. All of that, we need to do more of that. But as we also look at infrastructure, South Africa is Africa's most industrialized economy. And we must look also at regional infrastructure. How do we connect South Africa and the rest of the South African region to South Africa? And the bank, we are investing quite a lot in this area in terms of regional energy transport, but also regional transport corridors, which we must also have. South Africa has Transnet, and we have been investing in that to support the development of freight and passenger transport. We put in $750 million into that. We are also looking at investing in asset-backed financing for South Africa Taxis Company, which is going to be green transport and so on. Well, Mr. President, as chair of the African Union, you're doing a fantastic job. And I know that you're very clear about the importance of regional transport infrastructure. And I would just encourage the group that we look at not South Africa in isolation, but South Africa in relation to the rest of the South African region. Corridors, Makala corridors that we've invested $625 million in. The Welvis Bay Port, which is, we put $300 million into that. The Kasungula Bridge, linking Zambia and Botswana, and removing the bottlenecks on your north-south corridor that leads Durban to several of these countries. Just 3 points before I leave my thoughts here, Mr. President. I want to commend the point on agriculture, because you said it very rightly, Mr. President, and Minister Delilu, that infrastructure tends to be concentrated in urban areas. The rural areas are left out. So we need to actually deal with the issue of spatial distribution of infrastructure and make sure that we have density infrastructure in rural areas that can allow food and ag businesses to transpose into those areas and create, as you said, Mr. President, a new economy so that we turn those rural areas away from being zones of misery, economic misery, to zones of economic prosperity. I am delighted that we've been working with the government in the development of the special agro-industrial zones, which will do exactly what you were saying. And one of it is the Bokamoso Industrial Park, in which we are going to invest $140 million. But in addition to that, there are 9 other agro-industrial parks that we are going to be investing in for a total of $1.3 billion. And so you can count on the bank
Well, we seem to...
There are other things that we will bring to the table to support you. And one of it is in terms of project preparation facilities. We can have facilities to help with de-risking investments that are going to go into this particular place. As you know, we have Africa 50, which also can play a big role with regard to this. And finally, Mr. President, is blended finance. And just to end, I want to thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership on the Africa Investment Forum. As you know, Mr. President, this transactional forum is the one that we use to accelerate investment on the continent. You chair it, you host us with generosity. I want to also thank the Prime Minister, David Makura, from the Gauteng province on this. At the event for 2019 that we had, South Africa secured investment interest for deals that were approximately $3.6 billion. And for the 2018 event, we already closed transactions worth $850 million for infrastructure investment fund from South Africa, $500 million, and then a big agro-processing project for $350 million. All this to say, Mr. President, that seeds, as you said it sounds like seed. You know, I come from agri background, so I'm very excited when I see anything called seeds. That seeds will grow, it will germinate, it will grow. You know, I'm just here to tell you we have confidence in your vision, in your leadership, and in what has just been presented to us. Yes, there are uncertainties in the world, Mr. President, you said it right. But, you know, maybe they have been downgraded, but African Development Bank has no uncertainties about South Africa. We are boldly bullish about South Africa, and you can be confident that we will support strongly what you're trying to do as your plan to have economic recovery, put South Africa back on economic growth trajectory and sustainable development. So, Mr. President, you can count on us. I know you say you're a man who likes to count the money, so just let me know what we need. But we are here, and we're going to be strongly supporting Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, President of the African Development Bank, Mr. Akinwumi Ayodeji Adesina. And let's hear now from Mr. Leslie Marstorp as we continue hearing from the finance institutions, the Vice President of the New Development Bank.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. President, for this initiative. This initiative is in particular important in the context that we are now dealing with a short-term crisis, which is the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, but more importantly, we all recognize that it's much more important to focus on the medium-term economic impacts that this crisis will have. One of the aspects which President Adesina from AFDB just touched on now and that I want to also just amplify is the important role that multilateral development banks can play in a period like this. We are designed for crisis situations. We are institutions that have a mandate to be counter-cyclical. During moments like this where the traditional private financial sector contracts in terms of the availability of credit, we expand our lending. And just to give you an example of that, Mr. President, beginning of this year, when the pandemic broke, the BRICS countries were particularly heavily affected. I mean, as you know, the pandemic started in China, and traditionally our mandate is to build bricks and mortar infrastructure, building ports, rail, roads, bridges, and so on. In February, just after the pandemic peaked in China, we put in place a $10 billion emergency assistance program. So that $10 billion is focused on supporting the 5 BRICS countries. South Africa, therefore, has the capacity to tap into that $2 billion during the course of 2020. I'm very pleased, Mr. President, that on Friday, the formal approval from the Credit and Investment Committee and the bank was announced, which means in a matter of days, in a matter of weeks, we will be disbursing in a bullet payment the $1 billion assistance to South Africa. This $1 billion is focused on the immediate public health-related expenditure and also to assist the government with the funding gap in terms of the social safety net. As you know, there's additional support for social grants, which have been provided, and our loan will also complement that. However, for us, it's very important now that we design, Mr. President, the medium to longer term economic interventions. So there's another $1 billion to $1.5 billion, which we hope over the next 6 months we will co-design with the government how best to utilize that funding. But it's not just utilize the funding. President Adesina highlighted this issue around crowding in. We want to make sure that we can mobilize it. We can use our funding as a catalyst to crowd in more funding from the private sector. So this will be around supporting real productive economic infrastructure that will ensure that our economy can get back onto a growth path once we are able to emerge from this short-term crisis. Just the final point that I'd like to make is that the bank also very successfully, a couple of days ago on the 16th of June, raised $1.5 billion in Dublin on the Irish Stock Exchange. That was the first US dollar bond issuance of the bank. That is part of a $50 billion EMTN program which we raised. And one of the things that we would like to, that we have indicated to the South African government in the past, is that we will make our funding available also in South African rand. The advantage of that, obviously, is to ensure that there is no mismatch between the asset and the liability, meaning that when you pay back the loan, if it's in rand, it is more sustainable and easier for you to service that debt. Because when the rand obviously depreciates, as it has over the last 3, 4, 5 months, that sort of bill accumulates over time. So we have registered on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange a 10 billion rand program. We specifically also, and just to build on to what Minister Patricia de Lille mentioned earlier on, we're hoping also to tap into the green bond market here in South Africa. And maybe just to end off on that, one of the aspects that the bank has a very strong mandate on is ensuring that we can help our countries also during COVID, ensure that we deepen our sustainability and the green transition. So we want to make sure we put in place infrastructure that's sustainable for the medium and long term. So tapping into the green bond market is a very important aspect of that. We intend to raise South African rand within the next 6 to 9 months so that we can provide loans also therefore then in South African rand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marsdorf, and good to hear that the money is coming through. It is being pledged, so it will be available, but of course many questions as to exactly what we're going to do differently moving forward from what we've done in the past with that money. From the Development Bank of Southern Africa Chairperson, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, your remarks, please.
Thank you, Sakina, His Excellency President and fellow panelists. We've got 2 roles in mind, but largely we're part of the banking community, and our footprint is not only in South Africa but across the African continent. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. By and large, our clientele is the municipalities. Our exposure to the municipalities to the tune of 69 billion rand today. There's my other satisfied client, Pulugwana. He's the mayor of Pulugwana. So 69 billion rand. So when we sit here, we're trying to look at in which space do we fit in. We also are going to be hosting what is called the Infrastructure Fund. Dr. Ramhopa this afternoon will distinguish between the various kinds of category and which one will fit in within our infrastructure fund. We've already been given by government about 100 million rand in March, purely for preparation of projects. It's not for investment. Those projects, we've got money to do project preparation for them. We also play a role in student accommodation. We want to tap some of the provincial roads. Part of what Dr. Ramhopa referred to is uploading. In other words, if a provincial government is going to expend money on roads or schools over the next 3 years, we're more than happy to front load that and spend all of that expenditure over this year and fast-track spending for that project. Over the next 3 years, then we'll get our return. So it's part of the kind of things we want to play on. You know, I was listening yesterday to Dr. Nkosi saying to us, part of the difficulty, the pollution in the Vaal River is by 18 municipalities. I think there could be scope even there from where we sit with most of the green funds in South Africa sitting at DBSA. The green fund are sitting at DBSA. So we think that we can play a critical role in the infrastructure space, and we have been playing that role In fact, even the IPP office was the seed funding came from us. And we're trying to utilize that model as we develop the infrastructure fund offices in DBSA. So we've got an interesting role to play. And I think we can be able, over the next few months, if we succeed in front loading to keep most of the construction companies busy. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, Chairperson of the Development Bank of Southern Africa. And staying and wrapping the financiers, the money people at this point, we also do have with us Mr. Maktar Diop, who is the President for Infrastructure at the World Bank. Mr. Diop, over to you. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Excellency, Mr. President, thank you very much for this invitation. And Deputy Prime Minister, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to do it in Washington. For us, South Africa is critical in what our bank is doing in Africa. And what is making it easier for us to work here is that the vision that we have developed, which allow all international organizations to work together to support that vision. My brother, Dr. Adesina, mentioned it. Our colleague from the Development Bank also mentioned it. We are all working together to support it. And I think it was very much reflected in the way we work in the energy sector, where jointly we pull our resources to make them available to the government of South Africa to support their development strategy in terms of energy, which is not only an initiative and a vision which is centered around South Africa, but also which is centered around the rest of the continent. As we know, the strategy that was developed in the energy sector was relying very much on regional integrations that we are supporting. That's the reason why it's been very important for us also to support the neighboring country. The capital increase that the World Bank has recently had we allow the World Bank to continue extending the resource made available, but also the IDA resources that are now available will be able to help us to support neighboring countries and therefore create markets that are so necessary to develop infrastructure. We are coming at a time where the growth economy world economy is slowing down. We are entering a recession, so government revenue are going down in all countries. As has been mentioned, it requires to have counter-cyclical policies and to have stimuluses which help countries to face that economic slowdown. It's clear that without the private sector, it would not be possible to be able to respond to the important needs that you have highlighted in terms of investment in infrastructure. We are seeing beyond the resources that we can make available through IFC, our private sector branch, or through the World Bank. We're seeing a few instruments that are also very helpful in moving in that direction. We have a few facilities that are important. One is PPIF, which help at creating and strengthening the legal framework for PPPs. Just to illustrate what PPIF was able to contribute to, is that last year we engaged with the Vietnamese authorities, and at their request we prepare analytical work. And today, last week, the authorities in Vietnam were able to change the law and have a law which is much more adapted to their needs. So we have that facility, which is your facility, and we will be making available for you to tap in. The second one is project preparation. When we talked about infrastructure, one of the questions that is often being raised is the quality of project available. We have also a facility called GIF that we will like to make available so that South Africa can help strengthening the pipeline of projects that will allow to have more PPPs. Now, as you indicated, His Excellency, we are working very closely with South Africa, particularly with your Infrastructure and Investment Office, which is for us a very, very important element in the setting, and which allow us to channel our support in a much more coordinated way. I would like to build on what my colleagues have said about rebuilding differently. We are talking now about rebuilding the world, rebuilding economies differently. And having a green reconstruction will be central to it. And in that context, various instruments have been mentioned here, but what we already did in the energy sector with the solar has been critical in paving the way for the rest of the continent, because after the auctions that we had in South Africa, we are able to significantly contribute in lowering the cost of energy in the continent. So to conclude, Mr. President, not only for us from the World Bank, it's essential to continue supporting you in the transport sector, Transnet, in the energy sector, but also to do it for the rest of the continent. Because as been mentioned by my colleagues, South Africa is central in the growth rate of Africa. I would like to thank you and again reiterate World Bank availability to support your strategy in coordination with all my colleagues around the table. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Diop, Vice President for Infrastructure at the World Bank. I'm going to go to WebEx now, just to bring some of our other participants in on the discussion as well. And speaking to some of the premiers, let's start with the Premier of the Western Cape, Mr. Alan Winde. And this is, of course, the only one of our 9 provinces in South Africa that is led by the opposition, official opposition Democratic Alliance. Mr. Winde, your response to the President's remarks this morning.
Thank you very much, and Mr. President and ministers and colleagues, premiers, really good to be part of this panel. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I think it's a great initiative, specifically looking at moving beyond COVID-19, sustainable infrastructure development, sustainable infrastructure in general, and creating, for me, an environment that actually improves the livelihoods of our citizens. And I mean, I think the questions and the points raised are all in the right direction. I mean, we need water, we need energy, but I also want to say that, you know, as we move into this sort of post-COVID-19 environment, and I mean, I think everyone supports the infrastructure-led environment. We've got to create an environment that attracts investment, whether it's internal or external investment. And I also fully support the idea of how do we get it to be blended between government investing in infrastructure, but at the same time creating an attractive environment. And you know, I always say that we've got an issue with infrastructure. We have a shortage of infrastructure in our country and definitely in our province. We need that energy infrastructure. We need the water infrastructure to create the sustainable agri industries and to make our municipalities sustainable, because we have felt the impact of severe drought and we know exactly what it's like. So we need to make sure we get that water infrastructure. We've got to create the right vision. And I think specifically now, post-COVID environment that we're going into, the whole world is going to be looking at investment opportunity. And so how do we create the right ecosystem and the right environment that says this is where investment is going to be welcomed, and this is where it's going to be enabled, either on the back of government-led infrastructure investment, but also even allowing private sector to come up with great ideas that fall within that vision, and then allow that process of red tape to be minimalized, to make sure that it is a welcoming environment. And I think that's the kind of work that we need to invest in as governments at the moment, is that not only just the infrastructure, but the ecosystem, the enabling environment. It cannot take years and years for processes to be processed in order to either get a yes or a no. We need to definitely make sure that the red tape is removed, because I always look at this demand, and whether that demand is for the energy and water that I spoke about, or even with our citizens' demand for housing. We have massive demand, but at the same time, in our ecosystem, we have a number of major infrastructure companies, the businesses that deliver on infrastructure, and they are finding it very difficult. We've got a number of them in business rescue, and I think that's where the nexus comes together with that enabling environment. We need to make sure that we've got the red tape reduction in place. We need to obviously have checks and balances, but I do think that the ecosystem that we've got to develop now in the next short to medium term of creating the enabling environment is what we need to be focusing on as government. Because then what will happen is it will open up the investment both internally in our country, the trust from business, the business confidence index, seeing that going up, but also it will also become a place that the world says, well, post-COVID-19, in actual fact, this is the area in Africa that we should be investing because there's great opportunity. So that ecosystem, the work that we've got to do there, I think is critical right now, creating that environment that attracts investment, that makes people feel that they really are looked after if they are prepared to take their money out of their pockets. And of course, the real thing at the end of the day for me is how that becomes the enabling environment for further job creation. Have we got the right skills, training systems in place? Are we putting the right workforce in place to be able to support the investment that's going to come on the back of this infrastructure? But I think this is the right place to start having these discussions. And we need to then compartmentalize it and say, all right, this team is going to go ahead and have a look at removing blockages and making that enabling environment really work from an investment point of view to a skills development, so it actually results in proper, meaningful jobs as we create a better environment through infrastructure for our citizens.
Oh, thank you so much, Premier Windy. Let's move now to the Northwest Province, one of the smaller provinces, but the Northwest Province seems to have borne the brunt of service delivery protests, which speaks to this infrastructure development and a lack of service delivery on the ground. So, Professor Job Mogoro, if we could just hear your remarks, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President and your team. Thank you very much, Mr. President and your team. Before the outbreak of COVID-19, you really instilled a lot of hope and forward-looking within the nation through your various initiatives around investment, around finding opportunities for young people, and so on. Then we were struck by COVID-19, and once more, Mr. President, you rose up to the occasion and provided the necessary, critically needed leadership. And whilst we are in the midst of COVID-19, Mr. President, we really welcome the development of today, sustainable infrastructure development. And I think all these strides, all these initiatives point to one thing, that the South African nation should never lose hope. We must always look at adversity and find opportunities. Indeed, there is a silver lining within the dark cloud called COVID-19. And one component of the silver lining is to find tremendous opportunity in doing things differently, better, as we prepare and implement the new normal, where we will be focusing on matters of state capacity, which is very, very crucial for the topic under discussion today, where we look at public-private, community, civil society relationships, and ensure that the necessary capacity to expand and expedite development takes place. As a rural province, Mr. President, we have highlighted within the infrastructure domain the question of water. In particular within rural areas, particularly in the far-flung areas. Mr. President, we have also put squarely on the table the question of rural roads. We all know the impact of the state of our rural roads on social services, on economic development. With regard to social services, I think it is common knowledge that accessing health services, accessing education, accessing security becomes a very, very difficult and challenging process for people who live in rural areas. Mr. President, the requirements that we have are very, very clear. I've identified the question of water. It continues to be crucial, has been further highlighted with the outbreak of COVID-19. We're really moving far with your assistance with the Department of Water and Sanitation in making sure that we respond adequately to our people. The question of renewable energy is something that we have long had on the agenda, especially solar and waste and biomass, so that such energy initiatives will play an increasingly important role in the decades to come and contribute much to the share of provincial energy consumption. Accelerated investment, as I say, in roads, particularly rural roads, but also roads that are linked to the economic sector, such as tourism, which is quite a major sector within the province. Economic growth that are linked to agriculture, also very, very important if one considers the Maize Triangle in the western part of the province. If one considers that we actually, as a province, are housed to the Texas of South Africa, again around the Vryburg and surrounding areas. Mr. President, we have increasingly raised the question of information and communication technology, especially with regard to improving our broadband width. This has been further emphasized, Mr. President, with the advent and breakout of the pandemic and the fact that schooling and other activities suddenly have to speed up preparation and capability for the new normal. And one critical element of this new normal is, of course, the question of 4IR. Mr. President, in the eastern part of the province, adjacent to Gauteng, we have an IDZ, which depends largely on the necessary and appropriate infrastructure. Mr. President, we welcome the broadening of financing as articulated by Dr. Ramokgopa, which includes commercial aspect, blended, as well as fiscus. I think in the past, we have, in a way that has now been reviewed and makes much better sense, where we cannot really rely on the fiscus alone to promote economic growth and development. And I think this broadening really helps us to move with much greater impetus. And then, Mr. President, thank you very much. We look forward to a brighter future, notwithstanding the dark cloud of COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier Mohoro. And I think in keeping really with the problems that we constantly report on that are taking place in the Northwest Province, a whole shopping list of demands, requests there by Premier Job Mohoro for the President and all the financiers here. So much to be done there. And then perhaps one of our female premiers, Sisi Ntombela from the Free State. Again, a mini problem, and many seems to be rooted in another issue that I don't necessarily want to highlight now because I want to come to later, but just your response to the President. Ms. Ntombela? Well, don't seem to have a connection there. Let me move from there to the President of SALGA, the Local Government Association of South Africa. And of course, as you said, when I asked about expectations from this particular symposium, you spoke about being at the coalface, where the delivery actually happens. So Firstly, I'd like you to respond to the President before we get into other questions.
Well, thank you very much. And I think I will respond to the President in his own words. How funny. He launched the district development model. And the district development model was forcing us back into what the white paper of local government says. It says centralize, coordination, so that you can enhance your skill, limited where it is, and stretch your rent further. And I think we're at the level of COVID-19, which actually says to us, stretch the rent further, but providing quality. And just to get into the crux of that, we then got deep at work to start with National Treasury, Public Works with the program of capital expanded work projects in municipalities, which takes the 8 metros, 22 intermediary cities, that is Umhlutuze, in Richards Bay, Polokwane, Rustenburg, Umsunduzi, Maritzburg, which are intermediary cities, 22 of them, and coupled with that, 42 districts. So currently, as we're sitting to support the base of what Department of Public Works and Infrastructure and Dr. Ramkhopa have worked on, we've got 74 municipalities which are already ready and ready to submit and receive these projects. But on top of that, would have been to plan together with Public Works as the sector to be able to say where you do not have the skill, how do you come in? Mr. Godongwane spoke about the technical support that ourselves as municipalities, for example, are receiving from DBSA in terms of our wastewater treatment works, in terms of our electricity substations, roads, solid waste. Because all these are critical elements that a municipality that is properly functioning needs to have to be able to absorb and maintain the projects of this magnitude that are coming to this municipality. I often laugh with the team that the President has put up, that Minister Delil is a former mayor, Dr. Ramkhopa is a former mayor. So when I'm saying we need to look into the stringent procurement laws and the difficulties that we have at local government, we've already had 2 sessions already in terms of trying to look into those nuts and bolts, which will make it easy without eradicating accountability, but to make sure that the projects seamlessly land at a local government sphere, and monitoring and implementation is critical. You know, we always speak to technical and financial skills, but if you joined at a district level, you could have 3, 4 technical, highly skilled people who will service 4 or 5 local municipalities which are linked into that particular district. In that way, you stretch the range further and you maximize, rather than hiring 4 or 5 technocrats who are supposed to be localized at all these local municipalities. You will then go into 44 and make sure that your work is well entrenched. Of course, I know I wouldn't escape the fault of not speaking about maladministration when it comes to local government. And we have a commitment, which we have made last week also with the AG, to make sure that at 103 municipalities, we're beginning to go back with the enforcement of what the Audit Act says, and we enhance the capacity, both internally, impact level, which is oversight by councillors, internal audit oversight by administration, but ultimately ensuring the efficiency of external public auditors who are supposed to come and assess municipalities, and we call them audit committees. And we do believe that whatever the President will be sending to these 74 municipalities will then be able as a sphere to account appropriately for them, but would have made the situation and the whole municipality sphere conducive to receiving the projects that are within the development of government. So, esteemed guests, Honorable President, we welcome as SALGA, on behalf of our 257 municipalities, this infrastructure intervention, and will facilitate and assist us to ensure that the national and local economies are developed. They've already been worsened by the pandemic. I was interacting with the city of Kuruleni in the past 2 days, trying just to map the losses that they've made in terms of revenue collection, as we are doing rounds to assess the municipalities, to see the strength and be able to advise at national government appropriate. They've lost close to 2.6 billion. In the first month, in fact, in the first 2 months of COVID, they lost around 800 million. What does this suggest? It means we are able to have good economic areas which have got potential to develop, but there are pockets of hunger people who are unable to pay for their rates and taxes. And often we talk of metros and say they are big, they are economically viable. But within the city of Johannesburg, you find Diepsloot. Within Ekurhuleni, you find Tembisa, for example. And they are not able to draw as much as they would want to do that. But we commit ourselves, as I conclude, with all the stakeholders to support municipalities, but also to be host to all the strategic infrastructure investment business. We will support you. I know it is a bit difficult sometimes to work with us, but we are trying to be flexible and ensure that the procurement laws that we are reviewing could be able to make it easy for direct investment to come at a municipal level. But with the partnership of Public Works and the Office of the President, I think we should be able to win and even win much faster. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Nkadimeng. And seeing that you were looking directly at Mr. Jaco Maria talking there about investment, let's talk to that investment perspective, Mr. Maria.
Well, thank you, Sakina and President. I speak as an investment envoy who's spoken to hundreds of companies, both local and foreign, that operate in this arena. And I think it's fair to say that as a country, as South Africans, we have got a habit, I think, of trying to do too many things at once, at the same time. I really do worry when I hear about hundreds of projects that are being considered. We have to prioritize. Why do we have to prioritize? You have to prioritize if you want to get things done. You won't get anything done if you don't prioritize. And I think we really have to prioritize carefully between infrastructure that will increase the productive capacity of our country versus infrastructure which is critically needed, which is more social infrastructure, which is also important. But we have to get that balance right. And as President Adesina was saying, we really have to look beyond just particular infrastructure projects, but creating hubs where we can concentrate on exports, because we're going to repay all this debt that we incur, and we're going to have to export a lot more. So we need to think about prioritization. A lot has been said by you, President, and Minister De Lille about the time is now for execution, delivery, not for planning. To do that, you've got to do two things. You've got to liberate the private sector, free it up to be able to do what it does best, and we've got to quickly get a fast track, a policy framework so that we can do the PPPs and things that we need to do. We've been talking about this stuff for years, and we need to get it done very quickly. Something that the companies will all tell you that operate in this area is that they need to know that this is not just a flash in the pan, that it's something that's going to go on for many years. We all know that our construction companies are in terrible trouble. Our engineering companies are in trouble, our steel companies are in trouble, our cement companies are all in trouble. They can only retool and fix and re-engineer themselves if they know that there's going to be a sustained round of projects of this size. There's no point in them gearing up for one project. They need to do that. On the financing side, as the government debt to GDP ratio is projected possibly to head towards the 100% level, the government will not be able to finance these projects. Yes, they will be state-led. They have to be state-led, but they have to be financed by the private sector, DFIs, multilateral development banks, and so on. We know that CISA, our long-term savings institutions in this country, are very keen to finance these kinds of assets because they provide long-term returns that match their liabilities in pensions and so on. But as the debt to GDP ratio of the country goes up, they're going to have to buy more government debt, so then they won't be able to buy infrastructure assets. There's a trade-off there. So we are going to need the international DFIs, the MDBs, and something that hasn't been mentioned, the sovereign wealth funds. Some of the biggest sovereign wealth funds in the world are very interested in infrastructure assets, and they keep asking us, where are your projects? So we need to be able to show them the projects with appropriate returns. We have to act with speed. As you said, President, all countries are looking at this because we're in a unique situation where all countries are in trouble. All countries have to get out of this COVID problem, and they're all going to look to do infrastructure. And so you're in a competitive game here if you're looking for money. The US is talking about a $1 trillion infrastructure build. The UK is talking about £100 billion infrastructure build in 18 months. So we're going to be competing, and therefore we have to be quick. We haven't got time to waste if we want to get the money that is on offer. So after this conference, my last point, after this conference, the world's going to be watching to see if South Africa actually delivers or whether we've just been talking. So we have to be able to deliver some showcase and showcase some examples, some real live examples that people can say, yes, we're really starting to see progress here. I think there's some easy wins. Toll roads, the N4 to Maputo, the N3, those are coming to the end. They'll soon be returned as good assets after a build, operate and transfer to the government. And I know SANRAL have got plans. Those would be easily financeable and quick wins. Renewable energy, I think we all know that there are projects that are waiting. There are one or two that are just waiting for one signature from Eskom on a power purchasing agreement to get going. I think those are some low-hanging fruit. And I think if in 3 months we could announce, say, 5 big projects, not 6 months, because 6 months takes us to 2021, I think you could really get some momentum here. But I think it's very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Maria. And I want to go to WebEx now. I'm not sure if is it Dr. Mokate is with us, because I can't see her up on the screen right now. But if you are with us, then please, I'd like to hear your sentiments as well with regard to the actual investment perspective.
Can you hear me?
And I can see you now. Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much for giving the opportunity to comment. I'd like to just start, as everyone has, by commending the President on this symposium, as well as Dr. Ramokgopa and the people that have worked with him on all the hard work that they have put into this. You've heard from everybody that infrastructure is critical for our future growth and development as a country, and we fully support that. That perspective. I think what is exciting about the SIDS program is the manner in which it seeks to galvanize all the critical stakeholders within the infrastructure investment and implementation space, focusing everyone around a common mission. And that's a critical first step. The other important steps have been identified by fellow panelists, particularly where do we go from today? The issues that need to be prioritized, in my view, have been identified by Dr. Ramokgopa, but I'd like to just emphasize those. The need to create a conducive policy and regulatory framework in all the different sectors that we have identified. We recently had a workshop with various experts from water, energy, and the digital infrastructure, and a common view that was presented was there is money out there, there are people that are willing to invest. However, one of the constraints is the policy and regulatory environment. As the Government Employees Pension Fund, we have experienced this firsthand, where we've set aside 23 billion rands for renewable energy, but we have not been able to move that money. So this is a real issue, and one of the first things that we need to look at critically. I would also echo the points that have been made about the need for us to prioritize and sequence the investment projects that we have in place and are identifying. And we need to also consider the trade-offs that might be associated with these different projects, so that we maximize the amount, the rand and the skills that are at our disposal. So the idea of having compacting, of social compacting, I think is absolutely critical for the success of the SIDS program, because we've got to admit that we've got significant needs and we've got limited resources, whether it's financial or from a skills perspective. And we've got to focus on those things that enable us to achieve the greatest benefit for our society, both from an economic and a social point of view. And I have no doubt that if we are transparent and open about these trade-offs and the competition for resources, we will be in a far better position, to really move this program rapidly and in the right sort of direction. Just a final point as a trustee of the Government Employees Pension Fund, and that is to say that pension funds are an important player in this arena. Leslie mentioned that as MDPs, they are hardwired to deal with crises. Pension funds are hardwired to deal with long-term investments as patient capital. But like everybody else, we do need that the projects must be fundable, they must be finance ready. And so we would emphasize the steps that have been put in place and ensuring that they are really strengthened. And I'm talking about the design, the preparation, the feasibility, and so forth, so that we can be able to play an appropriate role as a pension fund. So we look forward to the continuation of the SIDS, ensuring that it makes an economic and social impact, and that all the talent in South Africa is mobilized around this very, very important mission that the president has set forth for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mokate. And I just want to ask of Mr. Martin Kingston, the Vice President of Business Unity South Africa, speaking about a public-private partnership. What sort of partnerships and funding models do we need to actually realize in order to meet our development needs?
Thank you. Well, we have already discussed, and the President started this morning by talking about the new relationship that has been established between business, government, and other social partners. And I think we need to consider that in the context of the dark cloud, as one of the premiers referred to, in which we currently find ourselves. I would argue that COVID-19, in fact, represents a golden opportunity for us as a country, an opportunity we cannot afford to waste. We need to recognize that as a nation, we'll only be able to address our challenges, materially improve the lives of all South Africans, and deliver on the promise of 1994 if we're able to kickstart and sustain high levels of inclusive growth. And we recognize and we acknowledge that sustainable infrastructure lies at the very heart of that growth. But unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do this after COVID. We're going to have to start it during COVID. COVID-19 represents a systemic challenge to our economy, to the health of our citizenry, and indeed, as we've discussed before, potentially to the very fabric of society. We are perhaps now going to enter the most difficult phase of the pandemic, with very serious levels of infection and mortality, and it amplifies the unemployment, the inequality, and indeed the poverty that we've been trying to address. The President earlier today talked about the anticipated contraction in the economy. We await with anticipation the budget that will be tabled tomorrow, which I think will set out just how challenged our economy is and the sacrifices we're all going to have to make. And the only way we'll be able to address those sacrifices is by working together in solidarity. And working together in solidarity is indeed a public-private partnership writ large. We're going to have to take very decisive actions, and I agree with Jacko that we're going to have to ruthlessly evaluate the necessity and the efficiency of every single spending choice, both with respect to key bankable infrastructure projects, but also with our forthcoming budget. We recognize the need to shift the focus of our engagements to what can be done, as we've also discussed, to create an enabling environment for investment and growth based on competitiveness and the ease of doing business, sitting with those self-same countries in attracting investment to South Africa, and we're going to have to do so for infrastructure that is shovel-ready and able to be immediately implemented. And there's no doubt that the public and the private sector can work hand in glove to identify, to design, to fund, to develop, and, where appropriate, to own and to operate a broad range of infrastructure projects, not only in South Africa, but also in the rest of the continent, particularly in network industries. Finally, I'd like to say that this is the culmination of very significant work that has taken place over several years, not just months, several years. And we now need to move directly into an urgent implementation phase of those projects that are bankable and viable in an appropriate policy environment. We all acknowledge what needs to be done. There are many examples of low-hanging fruit that we're going to have to harvest as a matter of urgency. And as business, we're fully committed to putting all the necessary financial and human resources at the disposal of the nation to expedite those priority infrastructure projects, which needs to be done on a collaborative and an integrated basis, ensuring that, in fact, during, as I said, as well as after COVID-19, sustainable infrastructure can play its part in driving a sustainable and inclusive economy.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kingston. Let's go to the Premier of KwaZulu-Natal, that's Mr. Sihle Zikalala. Now, as Mr. Kingston points out, what COVID-19 has done is that it has laid bare the inequality that we have been grappling with for so long, and it's really brought to the fore the reality of this inequality. And if we're being honest, if we look at the NDP 2030, we were going to struggle to meet those goals anyway without the interruption and disruption that COVID-19 has brought about. So looking at where we are at right now and what has been said, Mr. Zikalala, we have to move from the premise, first and foremost, that this is, of course, a health crisis, first and foremost, but then comes the infrastructure part of it that we hope will kickstart our development and deal with issues such as inequality, such as unemployment, and that triple axis that we've spoken about for so many years. But as a province, how do you see yourself moving forward from the position that you find yourself in right now and what has been said here this morning? Mr. Zikalala? Well, Mr. Zikalala not there. Mr. Zungu, I'll throw that same question to you, as it pertains to our starting point moving from this particular pandemic.
Well, my view is that, like Martin said earlier, COVID-19 is an unprecedented phenomenon. In the words of some eminent persons, paraphrasing them, it's a crisis that must never be allowed to go to waste. And the fact that we as South Africans are probably first in the starting block, to try and harvest the good that may come out of this crisis is a good start. Certainly from our side as a Black Business Council, we've identified 3 possible threats which have featured somewhere in the earlier presentations to a successful implementation of this wonderful program. One of them is obviously corruption. You will remember that there was a massive infrastructure build leading up to 2019. The construction players were guilty, admittedly, and they entered into what is called the voluntary rebuilding program. That has led to a massive transformation in the sector. As you'll have noted, Marian Roberts, for example, sold its Conco business to Black players. Avenged did the same thing. Some major players like Stephanie Stokes have entered into impressive BE programs. We will not allow this corruption to happen under our watch as an organization of business. And that's one of the major commitments that we're making, to the President that the Black Business Council stands ready to confront the scourge of corruption. We are inviting international players to assist us, and we have to give them that commitment that every rand solicited to go into infrastructure will be well spent. And we stand as organized business formation, as guardians, as vigilant players to ensure that indeed that happens. The second threat is exclusion. In the context of what is sweeping the world today, which is Black Lives Matter, women are also adding, women lives matter. They certainly matter in the economy. So Black Lives Matter in the economy. We cannot afford a situation where 200, half a trillion rands spent in the infrastructure, we again cry that Black people were excluded, women felt marginalized, young people marginalized. We must not have exclusion happening or continue to happen in our own shores. So we'll be watching very jealously against that. Number three, the capability and the capacity of the state. It's become a cliche. It's probably not a South African phenomenon. It's a world phenomenon. State agencies fail to contract properly. And hence you have cost overruns, you have shoddy workmanship, and they're unable to litigate successfully against the culprits. So there comes this issue of a triple P, public-private partnership, where we as a private sector bring in the skills and assist state agencies to be able to contract properly, so that whether you are a major player from outside the country, you are held to account if you fall foul of the rules. The last point from our side is South African commercial banks must come to the party. In most cases, as Black business, we have complained that we're not taken seriously by them. They don't advance credit to them. Now that the construction companies are in the hands of Black business, we hope that they can access credit to execute on these projects. Suddenly, the commercial banks must not be shy, just because the agencies who must implement this are now Black players. So we are watching very jealously. That's basically us saying there are agencies who have been associated with stymieing the successful execution of projects in provinces. We know that we'll not mention them by name, but we as the Black Business Council are engaging them to say, don't put our country to shame. These projects must run seamlessly and must happen within time, within course, without any impediments. So that's our responsibility as Black Business Council. We'll be there in all provinces, including KwaZulu-Natal and others, to ensure that on the ground projects get implemented properly. Thank you.
So the question then becomes, because if we take a look at mega infrastructure projects historically, there's always been an element of corruption that comes into play. So how do we better capacitate and recalibrate the state to deal with this corruption? And, if we have with us Ms. Renosi Mokate from the President's Advisory Council, maybe she can give us a sense of what the state intends to do. Ms. Mokate?
Yes, I'm here, Sakina. Thank you very much. I cannot tell you what the state intends to do because we advise the president on these various issues. Suffice to say that the issue of state capacity is something that we have also identified as being critical. And if one looks at what has been done with the SIDS, I would say it really is a beginning of a new way of doing things. And because you need to start somewhere with the conceptualization, with the working the idea through various parties, as has been done through the SITS process. But as others have indicated, what is critical is the implementation aspect. And the points that have been raised by Mr. Zungu around corruption being a huge leakage in the process of trying to implement any project within the state. And this is from both from all players have to take accountability and responsibility for this, and as well as the other points that he has made about inclusion. One thing for sure, though, that we do know is that it's not as a consequence of lack of interest or lack of desire from the state to ensure that the corruption is limited. And this is demonstrated by the support that independent institutions such as the Auditor General are given. However, other levels of government also have to play a role, and all members of society have to play a role in that respect. And that's what we would be advising, not just the president, but our society at large, that this, corruption and limiting corruption is not the business of any one party. It's the business of all of us as a society.
Of the Eastern Cape, Mr. Oscar Mabuyane, with regard to this. And also, if you would care to speak to a more specific level, and one would imagine, if you think of Mr. Adesina spoke about Eskom quite a bit, and if you look at corruption at Eskom at a specific level and the capacitation that happens there, one has to ask the question, what is it that Eskom is trying to deliver? And you look at the capacity of Eskom to deliver. If Eskom has to supply energy and electricity, and you look at the board of Eskom, you would expect to see a whole lot of engineers there, at the very least, who would actually know how to actually take the task and then implement and deliver. But is that what actually happens at a very specific level? Are these boards, are the councils at a local government level, are they fit for purpose, or are they filled with people who don't have the requisite skill set to actually deliver on what it is that you set out to do? Mr. Mabuyane?
Didn't see him.
Yeah, I saw his name just now, but I think he's gone.
It was his MEC for Public Works.
Was it the MEC? Because is the MEC still there?
Zigalala is there now.
I see Mr. Zigalala is there now. Okay, Mr. Zigalala, maybe we can put this to you.
For having us, and greetings to the President and all members throughout the country, with the participation of all stakeholders, and ensure that there is transparency in everything that is being done to avoid and prevent any form of corrupt practices that might happen. But for us in KwaZulu-Natal, I think it would be better to respond to that initial question you posed about addressing inequality. That's why some of the projects we have submitted are spread throughout KwaZulu-Natal, including rural areas. We have submitted 4 agri-parks, which are very comprehensive and bankable, and they address the issue of agriculture, food production, for both domestic, but also for exportation. Now, we have also focused on the energy, with Richards Bay being a point of renewable energy, as well as the port development. And the port development is quite important for us as it connects us with the whole of SADC. And that is one of the strategic location, the advantages of KwaZulu-Natal, because through port, we are able to access number of countries in the SADC, but also to trade with the whole world. So these are bankable projects that have gone via through feasibility studies, and we support the initiative. We also embrace the partnership with the private sector, and we believe that will enhance the effectiveness of this project.
Thank you so much, Premier Zikalala. And again, you're highlighting the issue of collaboration, because South Africa by itself can only do so much. It will need to collaborate with regional, continental, and international partners as well, because that would provide a platform to actually pool resources that can, in fact, do a lot more. But in terms of how we fared thus far in that regard, how well have we done? Because that's the other thing, monitoring our progress on policy. It's one thing to put the policy on paper, but if we don't go back and monitor exactly how well that policy worked, what does that mean? Dr. Zamani Saul, he was there earlier, I'm not sure if he's still there, because if you take, for example, where we started as a democratic nation with the Reconstruction and Development Program that the President also touched on, did we do a proper evaluation of how far that brought us?
Thank you very much, Sakina, and thanks to the President and the Minister for Infrastructure for according us this rare opportunity to be in a position to engage with such a very critical and important topic. I think one of the issues that you are asking me about, it's more related to our capacity to implement some of our plans. I think that's one of the issues which the President has consistently raised in each and every platform that he gets, that our quest to build a developmental state, it's premised on the capacity of our state to implement some of our major projects that we've identified. Because it does not really help to have symposium and have conferences and take far-reaching policy decisions if there is no adequate capacity to implement. But what hinges on the adequate capacity to implement, and particularly for this symposium, is basically our planning capacity. Do we have adequate capacity as the state to plan these major and mega infrastructure projects? And linked to that is our capacity to implement. And do we possess the technical capacity that we need to implement these projects? And if you also look basically at what happened during your post-World War II period, the primary focus was to ensure that we strengthen the capacity of governments to execute mega and major infrastructure projects, which actually served as a catalyst for economic growth. That is what we need in South Africa as we are currently speaking of a post-COVID economic recovery plan. I agree with the President that infrastructure, rollout of infrastructure will become the flywheel. That's the word that he used, flywheel, which I hear for the first time today. But what we normally say, it will be the catalyst for growth, rollout of major infrastructure projects. But whether we'll be able to do that successfully, we'll be able to put in place infrastructure that will serve as a catalyst or a flywheel for economic growth, it will all depend first and foremost on the capacity of the state. Number one, capacity of the state to attract the necessary investment, technical capacity of the state to ensure proper planning and execution of this project. That is one of the areas that we need to work on. As I was listening to Dr. Ramakgopa, I was very much impressed because seemingly all the 276 projects that he mentioned, of which 88 are ready for financial investment and financial close, it reflects a semblance of capacity, because what he is presenting, it's shovel-ready projects that at any given time, as soon as you get the necessary investment, implementation thereof can start. And also the issue of implementation is linked to our capacity to ensure that there is consequence management. And we also protect the implementation of this project from corrupt practices and malfeasance. So it's quite a combination of issues which I think, with the attitude of the sixth administration, to ensure that we root out corruption, we build the capacity of state, we plan properly, and pointedly we know what is it that we want to achieve. I'm quite confident that there is the necessary capacity to ensure that we execute these programs to grow our economy post-COVID. I firmly agree with the view that whilst COVID causes a major disruption in all aspects of life, social, economic aspects of life, it presents us with an extraordinary opportunity for the first time to look into the structure, colonial structure of the South African economy. And what is it that we can do together with the people of South Africa to ensure that we change the colonial structure of the economy of South Africa by deracializing ownership, by also ensuring that the geographic disparities which are there are being addressed. One of the issues which was raised by Premier Zikalala, the urban-rural divide, we must be able to address it. Whilst we won't be able to stop people from rural areas to come to urban areas, but if there's a sense of economic growth and livelihood in rural areas, that might curb the numbers of people moving from rural to urban areas. It's a global phenomenon, rural-urban migration. But as soon as we create opportunities in rural areas that actually would curb that flow to which puts much greater pressure in terms of your service infrastructure in urban areas. But I think at the heart of all of these projects, if we want to have them to succeed, we need to strengthen our capacity. To implement them properly, we also need to strengthen our capacity to curb instances of malfeasance and corruption. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Premier Saul. And I see we have some MECs with us as well, also on the WebEx forum. So let's speak to the MEC for Education in Gauteng, Mr. Panyaza Lesufi. Mr. Yakumaria earlier spoke about low-hanging fruit, and I think one of the failings, as it were, that many would point to of this government is the fact that 26 years into our democracy, we still have children having to go to school in infrastructure that is dilapidated. They still have to use pit latrines, and school infrastructure to a certain extent remains a problem. So how do we speak to that problem in this particular context, Mr. Lesufi? Mr. Lesufi, I think you need to switch on your mic. Your lips are moving, but we can't hear you.
Thank you so much, Sakina. His Excellency, Mr. President, and the team, as well as fellow panelists. Sakina, thanks so much for the question, even though I'm representing our Premier, who unfortunately has a
We seem to have a bit of a problem with that connection, so we'll park that one there for the time being. A lot is being said. A lot still needs to be said, and I think there have been a lot of valuable contributions. His Excellency, the President, Minister Delil, Dr. Ramahupa, I deliberately didn't ask any questions of you because I wanted you to listen to the input that came from everybody else and then to respond to these very real questions that are being asked, the very real challenges that are being raised, and of course, to give some sort of guidance in terms of what the way forward may be. Let me start with Minister Delil.
Thank you, Sakina. I do know that people want to know what next. And I can report that the number of parallel processes are taking place already. Cabinet approved the infrastructure plan already on the 27th of May. We then started assessing all of those projects, and 55 of them are ready, and we have got the funding for it. So I agree with Mr. Murray that we now need to prioritize in terms of social and commercial infrastructure. We have sort of done that already. We looked at infrastructure that are commercially viable, and we've referred that to some of the commercial banks, the MDIs and the FDIs. Then we looked at, at projects that are requiring blended finance, and we sent that to the DBSA and the infrastructure fund that the President established a year ago to see would we get funding from there. And then also infrastructure projects that will be solely funded by the fiscus. So we engage with National Treasury so that there is money in the current financial year, and we will be accessing that. Then also we were waiting for the President today to engage with all of you. So by next week, Tuesday, there's a provision in the Infrastructure Development Act whereby all of these projects will now be gazetted. By gazetting them, they can then be classified as urgent, and then also we will also then have what we call an expedited mechanism in the Act that we will use to do that. Then the issue of accountability. It's worked in right through the system. The Cabinet will receive a report on a quarterly basis. There's also the oversight of the Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Council that the President chairs and convenes, and we have to report there. And finally, this President is very strict, so all ministers have got performance agreements, and I've signed mine already, so there are also targets in the minister's performance agreement. So I really look forward that government cannot do it alone. We need your help. We need all South Africans that can offer help to government to come, and let's do it together. I agree with Mr. Zungu that here's an opportunity now. If we have failed to transform in the past 26 years, let us now look at the past and look some of the good things that happened in the past and take that forward, but dump the ones that didn't work in the past. So really a lot of work is in progress, and Dr. Ramagopa and myself and the teams and the teams from the private sector has been made available to us for another year, and we really want to thank the private sector for all the technical skills that they've provided to bring us to where we are today. Thank you, Sakina.
Thank you, Minister Dalal. Before I get to Dr. Ramagopa, let me just bring in the MEC for Human Settlements in the Eastern Cape, Ms. Madigizela, and specifically speaking to the needs in the Eastern Cape before the President and Dr. Ramagopa give their response here. And of course, the Eastern Cape also a province beset with many an infrastructure problem and backlog. So what would you like to contribute here?
Thank you, Sakina. Greetings to the President, to the premiers and everyone await our country. And we must prepare now to define the economic path of which is premised on equitable development of provinces. That makes up our unitary state. Infrastructure development is a crucial is crucial to achieve a new economic path. As equitable development of infrastructure must not leave any province to fend for itself. We must approach the infrastructure development of our country. Actually, we must not approach the infrastructure development of our country as a tough forbidding wars between provinces. Our approach, we feel it should be biased towards developing the infrastructure of our rural provinces, which were neglected by the apartheid era spatial planning. We strongly believe, Chair, if we fail to do that, then we are deliberately continuing an injustice like that one of the regime, here oppressors, and we run a risk of overwhelming the provinces that are currently receiving migrants from rural provinces. What we feel should not escape our minds is the fact that rural provinces, they have land and potential to grow economy of our country to a higher trajectory. And therefore, we should be deliberate about developing infrastructure in rural provinces, such as Eastern Cape. Not only in words, but also through our actions. It pains us, President, in the province to see some delays that the national government and the SOEs that we feel that they could unlock job opportunities, economic growth in our province. If the excuse is not budgetary constraints, it is a long-drawn feasibility studies, and the people we serve are becoming very impatient and agitated. Now, we continue to ask ourselves, how do we explain that a project like Umzimvu have been in planning by government since 2004 have not taken place? It has been talked about by various leaders of government. Yom Tombo and Nelson Mandela waterfront development, and then a endless list of projects that have been talked about for years and they have not picked up with different reasons that you get. But the greatest challenge we face in our province in this 26th year of our democracy is unemployment, and youth unemployment in particular. Therefore, rolling out enabling infrastructure network, we feel it will create jobs, but more importantly, it will attract investors to come and create more sustainable jobs for our province. We want to record our appreciation for the direction of the president of the one government, one plan, and one budget agenda of the 6th term. We feel it will give us transparency in the implementation of infrastructure projects. The decision-making, particularly in municipal space, is critical for implementation of infrastructure projects. All of us must support local government to improve their turnaround times on decision-making. As the Eastern Cape, we want to acknowledge the approval of 7 catalytic projects that were submitted by Bucha SCZ for funding in the BFI. These projects will inject a total of 1.4 billion in our provincial economy and create jobs for our people. Sifuna ukutsho President asipheli manda Mongameli. We are preparing to resubmit again for the projects that were not successful in the BFI. We have hope in that this program will assist the province in making sure in the infrastructure backlog that we're suffering, as you could see, our dilapidating infrastructure, our health facilities that we're trying, and every infrastructure that we have in the province, generally, our roads. So this intervention, President, we feel it will strongly help the province.
And no, totally messing with protocol, but I believe MEC Lesufi says someone keeps muting him, so let's not deny him the opportunity to have his say here this afternoon. And MEC Lesufi, let's try this one more time.
Thank you so much, Sakina. I hope it won't happen. His Excellency, Mr. President, and the team there, as well as fellow panelists. Sakina, the question that you raised about pit toilets, another thing, I always tell people that since 1994, this government has not built even a single pit toilet. We continue to build quality toilets across all our communities, purely because the inheritance of those bad and unfortunate infrastructure backlogs that we had. We have to move with speed. We don't have to undermine the deficit that we inherited from the system that ignored the need for infrastructure in our communities but at the same time to move with speed to accommodate new communities that need our infrastructure. Continue to build good schools, continue to build new facilities in all our communities. It does not mean we endorse when learners fail or fall inside the pit latrines. We don't support that. We really believe it's something that can't be tolerated and can't be accepted. And we need to move with speed to really eradicate all the pit toilets. But the plan is there, the budget are there, the political will is there to ensure that we eliminate this kind of infrastructure. We don't need it, and we must ensure that it's totally eradicated in all our communities. Hence, if you check our investment, are occupying the highest level of investment in terms of projects and in terms of ensuring that we've got the capacity, the skill, and the talent to execute some of those particular programs. And that is why we welcome this initiative. We really believe it's a very important initiative. The roles are clear, the functions are clear as articulated by Dr. Ramokgopa. It gives us that courage that we can be in a position to go ahead with the investment plans that we have. We've got a total of 1,086 infrastructure projects in our province that are ready. The total value is almost 55.7 billion. We're working together with the Development Bank of South Africa to set up a special purpose vehicles to unlock these developments in areas where we really believe it will benefit our people. And if you check the major programs that we've put up, key and mainly are transport-related projects. If you check what we've done with the Gautrain, they need to commercialize all the taxi ranks, but also to promote rail and logistics in our province. We believe these kinds of projects will unlock all the necessary potential that we need within Gauteng. So we're excited, we are thrilled, and we look forward to work in this coordinated approach so that all of us can put our country first and can give opportunities to all our people and ensure that this economy benefit all of us rather than benefit the few. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Sakina. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Lesufi. Mr. President, it would seem as though there is a common purpose when it comes to moving South Africa in the right direction with regard to the theme that we are gathered under here today, investing in infrastructure for shared prosperity now, next, and beyond. And this is, of course, going to be critical because if South Africa does not address the triple axis of evil, which is inequality, and unemployment, especially exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, we are going to face social instability. There's no two ways about it. Hence, these need to be addressed critically. And if we look at some of the contributions that were made from the various finance institutions, they are willing to put the money there. The Development Bank of Southern Africa, apparently you have a lot of money, Mr. Godongwana, and we need to talk more about that. And so the money seems to be there. How we've missed it, I don't know, but as it has been said, there needs to be a prioritization and the money needs to be spent on the projects and the developments for which it is meant. So, Mr. President, in response to all of these submissions, I hand over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Sakina. As I told you, I've come here to collect checks. I've come here for the money. So I've had really good news about the availability of money. But let me start off by thanking everyone for participating in this symposium. This is indeed historic, as I said, and without repeating myself, I'd like to say that to bring together our provinces, the key players in the architecture, political architecture of our country, but also bring together local government players, as in the president of SALGA here, to bring them together with financiers, as in development banks, and not only local development banks like the DBSA, but international banks, development banks rather, and to come and bring everyone who is involved in the infrastructure development arena and to talk about pit latrines right up to the biggest dam that this country has to build, Umzimvubu, is phenomenal and it is historic. What we have done in this sixth administration is to highlight the importance of infrastructure. Infrastructure, as I call it, will be the flywheel that is going to drive the engine of growth in our country. And we've started off by saying we needed a fund, but we also knew that we needed partners who will be key players with us in putting together funding that could be part of the infrastructure fund and even beyond. And we are delighted that we've got all these partners, African Development Bank and many others, the New Development Bank and many others, and indeed European development agencies who are prepared to be players with us. We are deadly serious. And this moment, as Mr. Kingston said, presents us with a great opportunity. COVID and post-COVID gives us this great opportunity to speed up the processes of developing infrastructure. Mr. Giacomarii says we need to prioritize, and indeed we must prioritize. We cannot do everything. We know that for a fact. We've got to choose projects that are doable, implementable, bankable, and where finance can be found and be ready. And those projects must answer to fixed investment, but there are also social investment projects that are also going to have to be the catalyst of getting all these projects done. But we also need to look at the good balance between rural and urban. And I'm delighted that our provinces are participating in this. Some of our provinces are purely rural and some of them are purely urban. And that brings together a wonderful mix. But it's a mix that can only work if there's good partnership between the private sector and the public sector. And we've delineated the projects very well, as Minister Delil was saying, because some of the projects can easily be funded by the private sector. And those are going to be well packaged as they have already been packaged. And Minister Delil is running ahead. She's already ready to go and gazette. Those projects, as Dr. Ramokop was saying, are shovel ready, and funding has already been confirmed, and we are now ready to move ahead. We will announce in time, because I've said to my colleagues in government, I don't want us to be announcing and making promises to our people. We must announce when we turn the soil and we begin the construction work, so that our people can see that we are serious and we are moving ahead. This time round, we are going to fly with our projects, and it's going to be countrywide. We are not going to leave any of our provinces untouched. Each province in our country will be able to have their own catalytic projects. And those projects that will not be able to embark upon immediately, we will do so in time. And this is what Mr. Giacomarii said. We will be able to prioritize, not do everything all at one go, and be able to do all these projects as we move on. This time around, I think we are fully energized. We are all operating under the dark cloud of COVID-19. Now, I like imageries. The imagery that I have in mind is that we are all in a plane and it's going through a turbulent storm. We are in a plane and we are flying through a very turbulent storm, and that is COVID-19. We've got to fly through this storm, and all of us have a responsibility to stabilize this plane. And infrastructure is the one that is going to stabilize the economy of our country, as we stabilize many other areas as well. And through this, we will be able to create the jobs that are going to be lost. We'll be able to prop up the companies that are now ailing and are going to go through difficult time. And of course, we are going to be able, Mr. Giacomarii, to have a more long-term long-term sight for all those companies so that they know that this is not a flash in the pot, that infrastructure play is what is going to be the mainstay of our economy, because our infrastructure in our country needs a lot of attention. From the building side of the infrastructure and from the maintenance side of the infrastructure. So we are going to keep our companies, construction companies, very busy. And that is why we want transformation to be the key ingredient, because many of those companies must be black-owned, must be black-led, and they must be able to attract good skills through it. Now, I want to end by saying we have set up a really good facility, the facility that is overseen by Minister DeLille, that is being led by Dr. Ramokgopa. We would not have been able to get to this point if we had not set up this facility in the presidency. The facility itself, the office that Dr. Ramokgopa is leading, is the one that is driving this process, and we are going to drive it beyond. What has been able to achieve is to get the private sector to support it. So it's there, supported by the private sector from a skills point of view. So many people across the globe to participate in this initiative on infrastructure during the period of COVID, meaning that we're stabilizing the plane as it is flying through this turbulent period, and this is a plane that is going to land very, very safely beyond COVID. Destination is South Africa. Post-COVID must be a South Africa where infrastructure delivers the progress and the growth that we want. So I thank you all for your participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. And to everyone who participated, not sure if there's perhaps been a misalignment between myself and Nombulelo and Natalie, because I haven't seen any questions come through, but at this point, I'm not sure because I still don't have any, but as you can imagine, there are some very pertinent questions that still need to be asked. And of course, I think my colleagues, I don't know, haven't seen any questions. We closed.
They're all answered. Consider them answered.
So, Samkele, you are laughing. No questions whatsoever. As I said, Mr. President, I apologize, but I think the questions didn't come through. I did not see them. So, is there a separate media briefing? All right. There'll be a separate media briefing, and those questions, of course, will be answered at that point. But I thank everybody for their participation here this afternoon. Thank you so much to everybody who tuned in as well. And this, of course, was the Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium South Africa. And with that, we leave you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well done, Sakina.
Well done, Sakina.
All right, I just want to check from these catalytic projects that have been approved by Dr. Ramokgopa, how many from the province have been approved?
See.